The wind had teeth. Alara felt them sink into the thin wool of her cloak, tearing through to the skin beneath. Each gust was a predator's snarl, promising to rip her from the icy face of Whisper Peak and cast her into the screaming darkness below. The world had been reduced to three things: the blinding white of the snow, the howl of the storm, and the impossible, desperate thought that drove her upward. A pup. A blind pup. The words had slithered through her village at dusk, a venomous whisper passed from hearth to hearth. The Alpha King's son, born under a dark moon, his eyes clouded and useless. The Council of Elders, their hearts as frozen as the mountain that loomed over their lands, had invoked the old law. A defect in the royal line was a shadow on the pack, a weakness the winter would claim. And so, they had left him, on the mountain, to die. Alara's hands were numb inside her worn leather gloves. Her lungs burned with every breath of glacial air. She was a fool. She knew it. The villagers had called her barren, defective, a ghost haunting the edge of their prosperous lives. Her own mother looked through her as if she were a pane of smudged glass. What right did a ghost have to defy the laws of living wolves? But when she'd heard the news, something inside her had fractured. Not a thought, but a feeling. A vision, sharp and agonizing as a shard of ice in the eye. She saw a tiny bundle, no bigger than a loaf of bread, shivering under a thin blanket as the snow slowly, patiently buried it. It was an echo of something happening right now, or something that would happen in minutes. Her strange affliction, the one she never spoke of, had never been so clear, so cruel. She couldn't let it happen. She couldn't. The climb was a punishment. Jagged rocks hid beneath the snow, grabbing at her ankles. The path was a memory, buried under a fresh blanket of white fury. She moved by instinct, one frozen hand reaching above her, searching for a hold, then the other. Her body screamed. The cold was a physical weight, pressing down, trying to crush the last of her warmth. No one should die alone. The thought was not her own. It felt ancient, a piece of stone at the bottom of her soul. She had been alone her whole life, surrounded by people. The idea of this innocent, sightless creature experiencing that same profound isolation in its final moments was unbearable. It was a greater blasphemy than any broken law. She found him by the faintest whimper, nearly stolen by the wind. He was tucked into a small cleft of rock, just as the vision had shown her. The blanket was a fine royal blue, already stiff with frost, a mockery of comfort. Alara fell to her knees, her body finally giving out. She crawled the last few feet, her movements clumsy and desperate. Her fingers, stiff as wood, fumbled with the frozen cloth. Inside, the pup was terrifyingly still, a tiny, perfect wolf, his fur the color of ash. His eyes were closed. For a horrifying second, she thought she was too late. Then, a shudder. A weak, convulsive tremor that ran through his tiny body. Tears froze on her cheeks. She tore open her cloak, then her tunic, exposing her skin to the biting air. The shock of it almost stopped her heart. With shaking hands, she lifted the pup and pressed him against the bare skin of her chest, right over her frantic heartbeat. She wrapped her clothes back around them both, creating a small, desperate pocket of shared existence. His cold was a shock, a deep, deathly chill that seemed to suck the life right out of her. But she held on, pouring her own dwindling heat into his fragile form. "It's okay," she whispered, her voice raw and broken. "I'm here. I have you." She felt a faint stirring against her skin, a weak, seeking movement. He was alive. Getting down was harder than getting up. The pup was a precious, fragile weight against her heart. Every slip, every stumble sent a spike of terror through her. She was a shield, and she was cracking. Her vision blurred. The howling of the wind began to sound like a lullaby. Her legs grew heavy, thick, refusing her commands. She fell. Not a stumble, but a complete collapse. The snow was soft, almost welcoming, a cold bed calling her to rest. Just for a moment. She curled her body tighter around the pup, a final protective gesture. Sleep was so close. A shadow fell over her. It was immense, blocking out what little light filtered through the storm. She blinked, her eyelashes heavy with ice. A figure stood there, a giant carved from winter itself. He was covered in snow, his presence a vortex of silence in the heart of the storm's roar. The Alpha King. Terror, cold and sharp, cut through her exhaustion. He had come, not for the pup, for her, to punish the Omega who dared. He knelt, his movements economical and silent. The sheer scale of him was overwhelming. Broad shoulders, a frame built for war and rule. Up close, the cold wasn't just on him, it was in him. It radiated from him like a tangible aura. His face was harsh, all sharp angles and unforgiving lines, dusted with snow. But his eyes, they were the color of silver in the dead of winter, and they were fixed on the bundle she clutched to her chest. He reached out, and she flinched, pulling the pup tighter. A low sound rumbled in his chest. Not a growl. Something else. Pain. His huge, gloved hand didn't stop. It moved with impossible gentleness, brushing the snow from her face. His touch was freezing, yet it sent a jolt of something like lightning through her. He wasn't looking at her with anger. He was looking at her with a kind of shattered disbelief. "He's alive," she breathed, the words turning to frost. The king's silver eyes finally met hers. The storm in them was greater than the one on the mountain. He said nothing. He simply scooped her up, pup and all, into his arms. He held her as if she weighed nothing, as if she were as precious as the sun she had just saved. The world went dark. She woke to warmth. It was a disorienting sensation, so alien after the profound cold. She was lying in a bed, buried under a mountain of furs. A fire crackled in a stone hearth the size of a carriage, its light dancing on dark tapestried walls. The air smelled of wood smoke and pine and something else. Something clean and cold, like winter air after a fresh snowfall. The scent of the king. Panic seized her. She sat up, ignoring the ache in her limbs. The pup. Where was the pup? "He is safe." The voice came from the shadows near the fire. It was deep, a low thunder that vibrated in her bones. King Callum stepped into the light. He had shed his snow-covered cloak. He wore simple black trousers and a tunic, unadorned, but they did nothing to diminish his power. He held the pup, wrapped in a fresh, soft wool blanket, against his chest. He was giving the tiny wolf a bottle of warm milk, his large, scarred hands cradling the fragile life with breathtaking care. Elara stared, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was not the ruthless monarch of the stories. This was a father. He finished feeding the pup, laying him gently in a fur-lined basket near the hearth. Then he turned his full attention to her. His silver gaze was intense, analytical. He walked to her bedside and sat in a heavy wooden chair, bringing that aura of cold with him. "The healers tended to your frostbite," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "You were close to death." She swallowed, her throat dry. "The pup, your son, lives," he finished, "because of you." He leaned forward slightly, his presence filling the room. "My council of elders are wolves who have forgotten the difference between strength and cruelty. They follow laws written in an age of fear. I came to the mountain to defy them. I expected to find my son's grave. I found you instead." He paused, his eyes searching her face. Why? It was the same question she had asked herself. Why risk everything for a pup she didn't know, for a king who ruled a world that had discarded her? She looked at her hands, resting on the furs. They were bandaged, but she could still feel the phantom chill of the pup's body. "No one should die alone," she whispered, the same words from the mountain. Something flickered in his eyes, a crack in the glacial facade. The cold in the room seemed to deepen for a moment, as if drawing into him. He was a man drowning in an internal winter. She could feel it. Her strange sense wasn't just for objects, it was for people too. She could feel the echoes of his loneliness, vast and ancient. "I have been alone for 300 years, he said, his voice so quiet it was almost consumed by the fire's crackle. He had not had a mate, a true one, in all that time. His first, the mother of his son, was a political match. A gentle soul who had faded like a summer flower in his winter court. She died in childbirth, leaving him with a son deemed imperfect and a new, sharper grief to add to his collection. He was speaking to her as if she already knew, as if she could see the ghosts that haunted him. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the snow-blanketed courtyard. "They call you Baron. An Omega with no worth to the pack." It wasn't a question or an accusation. It was a statement of fact, of the world's foolishness. "Yes, Your Majesty," she said, her voice small. He turned back to her. "Warmth is not a thing my bloodline is known for, Elara. We are of the north. We are stone and ice. My son was born into my winter." He took a step closer. "And yet, you, who they say is empty and cold, climbed a mountain in a blizzard and held him to your heart to give him your fire." He was standing over her bed now. He reached out, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw. His touch as cold as it was on the mountain. But this time, she didn't flinch. She leaned into it. "In all my years," he said, his voice a raw whisper, "no one has ever shown my blood such warmth. I have seen warriors bend the knee and lords offer their fealty. It meant nothing." His thumb brushed across her lower lip. "This means everything." Her breath caught. This was too much. Too fast. She was a nobody. A defect. And the most powerful man in the world was looking at her like she was a sunrise. "I am saying that I see you, Elara," he breathed, his silver eyes burning into hers. The admission seemed to cost him something, to tear from a place he kept locked away. "And I will not let you go." It was a vow, a claim. In the language of a man who had forgotten how to speak of love, it was a confession. Hope, terrifying and brilliant, exploded in her chest. For the first time in her life, she felt seen. The hope lasted for 3 days. 3 impossible, dreamlike days. She stayed in the fire-warmed room, recovering her strength. The pup, whom Callum had quietly asked her to name, was a constant presence. She called him Nico. Little Victory. Callum was there more than he was not. He would sit for hours, watching her care for his son. They spoke little, but the silence was not empty. It was filled with a growing current, a magnetic pull. He would bring her meals himself. He would adjust the furs around her. Small, simple acts of care that felt more intimate than any touch she had ever known. She saw the toll his internal cold took on him. Sometimes a tremor would run through his hand. Sometimes the frost would creep back into his voice, and he would retreat into himself. She ached to reach out, to offer him the same warmth she had given his son, but she was afraid. On the 4th day, the dream shattered. The doors to her chamber were thrown open. Not by Callum, but by 2 of his royal guards. They did not look at her. Behind them stood a trio of elders, their faces grim, their robes the color of dried blood. And behind them, her mother. Elara's blood ran cold. Her mother, Lyra, looked regal and composed, her expression a mask of feigned concern that did not reach her eyes. Those eyes were chips of flint, hard and sharp. "Elara, my poor child," Lyra said, sweeping into the room. "To think you would be so foolish. The laws are the laws for a reason." Elder Theron, the High Elder, stepped forward. His face was a roadmap of wrinkles and disapproval. "King Callum, your sentiment for this female is a weakness. She has defied the old law She has tainted the royal bloodline with her defective hands. She brought a cursed pup into the heart of this fortress. Callum appeared in the doorway, a figure of silent, controlled fury. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. The only curse in this fortress, Theron, is your blind adherence to dogma. The pack is restless, another elder snapped. They see a king ruled by an Omega, a Baron Omega. It is an ill omen. The law is clear. She must be cleansed, or cast out. Execution is the traditional sentence, her mother added, her voice smooth as oil. She placed a hand on Alara's shoulder, a gesture of false comfort that felt like a brand. But exile would be a mercy, considering her misguided heart. Alara looked from her mother's triumphant face to Callum's frozen one. He was trapped. She could see it. The elders held the allegiance of the old families, the deep-rooted pacts. To defy them so openly on this would mean civil war. A war he might win, but one that would cost his people dearly. All for her. His silver eyes met hers across the room. The agony in them was a physical blow. He was the Alpha King, a being of immense power, and he was helpless. He made his choice. His face became a mask of ice, the one he showed the world. He raised a hand for silence. The Omega Alara has broken the law, he stated, his voice ringing with cold authority. Her life is forfeit. However, he paused, letting the word hang in the air. She acted not out of malice, but ignorance. She will not be executed. A murmur of protest from the elders. He silenced it with a glare. She will be exiled, sent to the farthest reaches of my domain. She will live alone, and her name will not be spoken at this court again. He looked directly at Alara, and for a split second, the mask slipped. She saw the desperation, the plea, trust me. But all she felt was the familiar, sickening plunge of abandonment. He had chosen his throne. He had discarded her, just like everyone else. The hope that had bloomed in her chest withered and died, leaving nothing but ash. Her mother's smile was a razor slash in the dim light. The exile was swift. She was given a pack of supplies, a thick cloak, and put on a horse led by 2 guards who refused to meet her eyes. They rode for 2 days, heading east, away from the stony heart of the kingdom and into the deep, whispering woods. Just before they left the fortress, a guard had approached her, his face impassive. He carried a basket. Inside, sleeping soundly, was Nico. The king's orders, the guard had muttered. He said the pup would not survive the winter here. It was an act of profound trust and a twisting of the knife. He was sending his son, his heart, into exile with her. He was trusting her with the one thing that mattered, even as he cast her away. The contradiction was a torment. The cottage was small but sturdy, nestled in a forgotten valley by a rushing stream. The guards left her with the supplies, the pup, and a final cryptic message from the king. He said to tell you, keep him safe, keep him warm, until I can undo this. The words were a tiny, flickering candle in the hurricane of her despair. She tried to cling to them, but the cold of his public rejection was too deep. He had cast her out. He had announced to the world that she was nothing. The days bled into weeks. Alara's life found a new, quiet rhythm, dictated by the needs of a growing, blind pup. Nico was her shadow, her purpose. He learned the layout of the small cottage and the meadow outside by sound and scent. He was bright and playful, his disability no barrier to his joy. Her love for him was a fierce, protective fire. It was the only thing that kept the crushing loneliness at bay. He was a piece of his father, a living reminder of those 3 impossible days. The guards returned once a month, leaving supplies at the edge of the woods. They never spoke to her, but sometimes she would press them for news. The answers were always spare. The king was consolidating power. The king had challenged the rights of the Elder Council. The king was becoming colder, more ruthless than ever. He was forging his kingdom into a weapon. She didn't know if he was fighting for her or simply erasing the memory of his moment of weakness. The uncertainty gnawed at her. Her strange power grew in the solitude. When she mended Nico's blanket, her fingers would brush the fabric and she would be flooded with images. A woman with a soft smile and eyes the color of summer sky, singing a lullaby. Nico's mother. She saw Callum, younger, standing beside her. A rare, small smile on his face. She felt his grief, a chasm that had opened long before he met Alara. One evening, holding a small wooden soldier Callum had carved for his son, a toy tucked secretly into the supplies, she saw more. She saw echoes of his own childhood, a demanding father, a cold court, a crushing weight of duty. She saw the source of his internal winter, a curse passed down his bloodline. A power so immense it fed on warmth, on love, leaving only ice in its wake. The more he felt, the colder he became, the more the power consumed him. His coldness wasn't a choice, it was a cage. The understanding changed everything. He hadn't pushed her away to save his throne. He had pushed her away to save her from his own encroaching ice. His confession had been a risk. Entrusting her with his son was an act of desperate faith. The candle of hope flared back to life, burning away some of the shadows. He was fighting. For them. The realization came just in time. It was a late autumn afternoon. The leaves had turned to fire and gold. Nico was tumbling in a pile of them near the cottage door. Alara was watching him, a real, genuine smile on her face when she felt the shift in the air. A wrongness. A figure emerged from the trees at the edge of the clearing. Her mother. Lyra was no longer dressed in the fine robes of the court. She wore practical leathers, and her face was stripped of all pretense. The flint in her eyes had been sharpened to deadly points. "I must admit, I am impressed," Lyra said, her voice cutting through the peaceful air. "You have survived. Thrived, even." Alara instinctively moved to stand between her mother and Nico, who had frozen, his head cocked, sensing the new, hostile presence. "What are you doing here? The guards are loyal to their gold, not their king," Lyra sneered. "It took me months, but I found you. The king was a fool to think he could hide you from me." "Leave," Alara said, her voice low and trembling, but firm. Her mother laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Oh, my dear, foolish child. You still don't understand, do you? You were never meant to exist. Not like this." She took a step closer, her eyes glittering with a venomous light. "You were not barren, Alara." The words hit Alara with the force of a physical blow. "What?" "I made you so. Or rather, I made the healers believe it. A simple herbal poison administered over years, tasteless, traceless. It mimics the signs of a closed womb, all to protect you, to protect myself." Alara's mind reeled. The shame, the years of worthlessness, the whispers, the averted eyes, all of it, a lie. "Why?" she choked out. "Because of your father," Lyra hissed, the truth finally spilling out, hot and toxic. "He was not the respectable pack warrior everyone believed. He was a rogue from the Sunstone Pack, our sworn enemies, a secret dalliance. Your existence was a disgrace I had to manage. If you had ever bonded, ever had a pup, your mixed blood would have been revealed. I would have been ruined, cast out, or worse." It all clicked into place. The cruelty, the coldness. It was all built on a foundation of fear. Saving that pup, Lyra gestured dismissively at Nico, was the worst thing you could have done. It drew the eye of the king. It gave you importance you were never meant to have. You became a threat to my secret. She drew a long, wicked-looking knife from her belt. The polished steel gleamed in the afternoon sun. "And threats," she said softly, "must be eliminated." Primal fear, cold and absolute, washed over Ilara. This wasn't about pack law or politics anymore. This was a mother coming to murder her own child. "You will not touch him," Alara snarled, the words ripped from her throat. Lyra smiled. I will start with him. She lunged. Alara reacted without thinking. She shoved Nico behind her and met her mother's charge. Lyra was faster, stronger, honed by a life of desperate survival. She sidestepped Alara's clumsy defense and slashed with the knife. The blade bit deep into Alara's forearm as she threw it up to block. Pain, white-hot and blinding, exploded up her arm. She cried out, stumbling back. Lyra pressed her advantage, her face a mask of cold fury. She was a cornered animal, willing to do anything to protect her lies. They struggled, a desperate, ugly dance of violence. Alara fought with a strength born of pure terror, her only thought to keep her body between the blade and the whimpering pup. She was no match for her mother's vicious skill. Lyra slammed her against the cottage wall, the impact knocking the wind from her lungs. The knife came up, aimed at her heart. Staring into her mother's merciless eyes, a lifetime of pain and rage crested within Alara. The years of being called worthless, the sting of being declared defective, the agony of being cast aside by the one person who should have loved her. The fury was a physical thing, a white-hot nova threatening to consume her. She wanted to scream, to claw, to destroy the woman who had stolen her life. But then, through the haze of her own rage, she saw it. Beyond the hate in her mother's eyes, deep, deep down, was a flicker of something else. Fear. The pathetic, terrified trembling of a woman whose entire world was built on a lie that was about to collapse. She wasn't a monster. She was just a coward. A sad, frightened woman who had chosen cruelty over shame. And in that instant, the rage within Alara vanished. It didn't fizzle out. It shattered like glass, replaced by a vast, aching pity. Holding on to the hate would only keep her chained to her mother's poison. Letting it go was the only way to be free. You were just afraid, Alara whispered, her voice clear and steady despite the knife at her throat. She forgave her. Not for Lyra's sake, for her own. The release was cataclysmic. It was the breaking of a dam inside her soul. The rage had been a plug, holding back a flood. Now the flood came. Her latent power, the time sense she had only ever touched in fragments, erupted. The world didn't go white. It went clear. Time rippled. The air grew thick, shimmering like heat haze. Alara saw it all. She saw her mother as a young woman, falling in love with a forbidden man. She saw the joy, then the fear of discovery. She saw the moment of choice, the decision to hide her child's heritage rather than face the consequences. She saw every lie build upon the last, creating a prison of her own making. She didn't push the visions into her mother. She simply let them leak out, let the truth of the air become visible. Lyra's eyes went wide. She saw what Alara saw. Her own life, stripped bare, the love she had sacrificed, the daughter she had twisted with her fear, the monster she had become. The knife clattered to the ground. Lyra stumbled back, her hands flying to her head as if to block out the unbearable truth. A sob tore from her throat, a sound of utter, soul-deep brokenness. She collapsed to her knees, weeping, finally defeated not by violence, but by the weight of her own choices. Alara sagged against the wall, her arms screaming in agony, her body shaking from the power that had surged through her. The clarity was already fading, leaving her exhausted, hollowed out. But they were not alone. From the woods emerged more figures. 4 wolves, their eyes hard, their allegiance clear. They were not Callum's men. They were the council's enforcers, drawn by the scent of blood, sent to ensure Lyra's success. They saw Alara, wounded. They saw the weeping woman on the ground. They saw the blind royal pup. Their orders were simple: leave no witnesses. They began to advance, surrounding the cottage. Alara grabbed Nico, pulling him close. She had nothing left. No strength, no power, just a bleeding arm and a desperate will to live. The lead wolf snarled, his lips peeling back from his teeth. The door wouldn't hold for more than a minute. It was over. Then a wave of impossible cold swept through the valley. The air itself seemed to crystallize. Frost bloomed on the golden leaves, and the wolf's breath plumed in thick white clouds. The lead enforcer froze mid-stride, a look of shocked terror on his face. A figure stepped out of the trees, moving with a silence that was more terrifying than any sound. King Callum. He was not dressed for court. He wore black battle leathers, and at his side was a great sword that seemed to drink the light from the air. The cold radiating from him was no longer a quiet ache, it was a weapon. His silver eyes were not glacial, they were storms of pure, murderous rage. He had come. One of the council wolves, either brave or stupid, turned to face him. By the old law, she is... Callum closed the distance between them in a single fluid motion. He didn't even draw his sword. He simply grabbed the wolf by the throat, his grip absolute. "I was addressing my future queen," he snarled, his voice a low, lethal vibration. The sheer, unrestrained power in his voice cracked the air. He tossed the wolf aside like a broken doll. The others scrambled back, their aggression melting into primal fear. Callum's incandescent gaze swept past them, past the broken form of Lyra, and landed on Alara. The fury in his eyes vanished, replaced by a raw, staggering relief that was so profound it was almost violent. He crossed the clearing in 3 long strides, his world narrowing to her, to the pup in her arms. He knelt before her, his eyes taking in her bleeding arm, her pale face. He reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and brushed a lock of hair from her forehead. "You were never exiled," he said, his voice thick with emotion he no longer tried to hide. "You were in sanctuary." He looked at Nico, safe in her arms, then back to her. "I sent my heart with you to keep it safe." The tears she had refused to shed now fell freely. He was here. He had come for her. He gently took her wounded arm, his touch impossibly cold, yet it soothed the burning pain. "I dismantled the council. I broke the old laws. I came to bring you home." He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw the change. The new depth in her eyes, the quiet hum of power that now resonated from her. He smiled, a true, breathtaking smile that cracked the ice of his face. "But it seems you have fought your own battles." He helped her to her feet, pulling her against his chest. She leaned into him, burying her face in his tunic, inhaling the scent of winter and safety. He was real. This was real. "It's over," he murmured into her hair, holding her like he would never let go. "It's over." Weeks later, Alara stood on a high balcony of the fortress, looking out over the moonlit, snow-covered peaks. The world was quiet, peaceful. In her arms, a sleeping Nico snuffled softly. Behind her, the doors opened and Callum stepped out. He came to stand beside her, wrapping an arm around her waist and pulling her back against his chest. He was a solid, comforting presence. The old council was gone, replaced by younger wolves loyal to their king and his queen. The old laws had been rewritten. Lyra, stripped of her status, had been given a life of quiet seclusion in a distant convent, left to wrestle with the truths Alara had forced her to see. Mercy, not vengeance. That had been Alara's choice. Her power, her time sense was no longer a curse. It was a gift. She could see echoes of the past, glimpses of the future, threads of possibility. It gave Callum's rule a wisdom and foresight it had never known. She was not just his mate, she was his partner, his equal. Nico stirred in her arms and Callum reached out, his hand stroking his son's soft fur. Alara watched his hand, the long, scarred fingers that had once been so cold. "Can you feel it?" she asked softly. He looked at her, his silver eyes clear and bright. He placed his other hand over hers, lacing their fingers together. His skin was no longer cold. The ice had receded. Her warmth, Her power had not fought his curse, it had balanced it. It had given him an anchor in the storm of his own magic. He nodded slowly. The cold is gone. A real, lasting warmth spread from his hand into hers. It filled the spaces where her own self-doubt had lived for so long. She was not barren. She was not defective. She was a queen. She was a mother. She was loved. She smiled, a true radiant smile. Leaning her head back against his shoulder, she closed her eyes and let a flicker of her power flow between them. She showed him a glimpse, an echo of a future yet to come. Nico, a young wolf, no longer small, running through a summer meadow with other pups, his blindness no hindrance to his laughter. A little girl with Alara's warm brown eyes and Callum's silver-streaked hair, pulling on her father's hand. A lifetime of mornings like this. A lifetime of warmth. He tightened his arm around her, his breath catching. He had saved her from exile and death. But she, the discarded Omega who had climbed a mountain in a storm, had saved him from a prison of ice 1,000 times more lonely. She had saved his son. She had saved his soul. Together, they had found their home.